Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the teams with the most to prove. As we head into 2025, there's a couple more teams that I have on my list, so we'll probably do at least one more of these later in the week. But let's go ahead and get into all my favorite transfer portal pickups. And some of these guys will be big time names that you'll all know. Some won't be names that are readily on your mind, but you've heard of. Definitely will be a really interesting group in. You saw a ton of movement throughout this last winter cycle. Obviously, not too much of it was around the quarterbacks. Now, there were some big time quarterbacks, and we'll talk about a couple of them here in a second. But overall, there were a lot of guys flying around, and I have a couple that really stood out to me. Fluff Bothwell, and it's not just because of his name, but he was a great running back for South Alabama this past year. Went for 832, 13 touchdowns, 7.5 yards per carry for this kid. It was incredible throughout his time at South Alabama, and now you bring him over to Mississippi State, and I think that's the biggest thing for me. An offense that wants to move fast, an offense that wants to play around with different paces and make things really tough and throw the ball around a good bit. A running back like this can do damage in that group because you're going to want to play light boxes. You're going to want to make sure that you're taking care of all of the different concepts on the outside that Jeff Lebby's going to throw at you, that having one of these types of running backs that you can ride to a victory is going to be huge for this team over in Starkville. And I think it's going to be one of those things where maybe he's not absolutely perfect right out the gate. Maybe he's not, this most polished back in the country, and maybe it does take till 2026, which hopefully he'll be in Starkville by then. But at the end of the day, maybe it will take a little bit of time for this kid, but I think he's going to be special. I think he's going to be someone that really pops onto the scene, and we look back in a couple of years or even 1 year and say, that's someone that can go to the NFL draft because he went to Mississippi State. I think it's an offense that just makes sense for what he does. I think it's an offense that will open up a lot of running lanes for him. And when you find this guy in a running lane, he is going to make you pay. There's no two ways about that. Really like this guy and definitely think he's going to do some special things for Mississippi State this year. Another running back here is Mekhi Hughes. This is one of my favorite players in the country, plain and simple. He's a guy that came over from Tulane, had 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns this past year. As good as Jordan James was, I think I might just prefer Mekhi Hughes, if I'm being totally honest. Now, he did struggle against some of the better defenses that he placed throughout the year, but he also had an offensive line that struggled against that group as well. So I'm not necessarily going to hold it against him too aggressively. I do think the bigger thing here is the pass game is going to be lethal. The pass game is going to be terrifying at Oregon. That's what defenses are going to have to prepare for. Mekhi Hughes is going to have run lanes on run lanes on run lanes, and he's going to have so many openings to make big-time plays throughout this thing. And then you have wide receivers on the outside that can block their butt off, can block their butt off in a lot of different ways, can make some big time plays on the outside, and Mekhi Hughes is a guy that I think he can be special. I think he can be a Doak Walker Award candidate, probably should have been in that mix this year. I think he very well will be in that mix in 2025. A little bit of a twofer here, but CJ Donaldson and Max Clare finding their way over to Ohio State is as massive as can be. CJ Donaldson comes into a place where he could be a true star in 2025, if I'm not mistaken here. I think he's one of the more underappreciated guys when he was at West Virginia, But he's definitely a guy that can make every single play you want, especially between the tackles. Very, very talented at running downhill, and will give a little bit of that edge that Quinshon Judkins gave. Definitely will be the edge that C.J. Donaldson gives. And then you have James Peoples to kind of play off of as kind of the Travion Henderson of the group, if you will. And then Max Clare, a dude at tight end, an absolute freak, one of the better pass-catching tight ends in the country, and definitely a guy that, when you look back on the elite Ohio State offenses, the ones that absolutely tore through people and made life miserable, and this one was a little bit different because it only happened in the last 4 games of the season, but in terms of the offenses that were just ridiculous throughout the year, they always had the tight end. They always had someone to kind of give them that security blanket, give them that one big crosser over the middle of the field throughout the game. Cade Stover's the one that I remember most readily, but there were tons of other guys throughout the last couple of years. I think it's a huge piece to the Ryan Day offense and the Chip Kelly offense. I think they're going to open it up just a little bit. Now, Chip Kelly's something we can talk about later in the week. Might not be in Ohio State too longer, but we'll get into that in time. But C.J. Donaldson is going to be a great player that I have super high expectations about. I think Max Clare could be a John Mackey Award winner as far as I'm concerned. He's an elite talent and definitely a guy that in the right offense with the right quarterback could do some really special things. John Mateer is the first quarterback here, and it's really just, I think, the world of this kid. And he's an elite athlete in every sense of the word, but It's kind of because the offensive line of Oklahoma is so bad. The reason that I like this one so much, because you needed a guy like this. You needed a veteran guy that is more than comfortable running around, keeping his heart rate slow, and making the throw that you badly need him to make. The offensive line won't be elite in 2025. I bet that it won't even be great. It might not even be good. But the reality is, you have to find a way to make plays. One way or another, this quarterback has to find a way to make plays. Michael Hawkins was a great player at getting away from pressure, at running for first downs. John Mateer is a guy that can get away from pressure and then throw the ball downfield for a 20-yard gain. He's the guy that can get away from pressure like 3 different times and then make the third down run that you badly need and put his shoulder down at the end of it. He is a guy that Oklahoma just needs right now. They need a quarterback that can really take over the reins, that can say, this is my game right now, and I'm going to do what I need to do to go win it. It might not be a perfect year. There's no doubt about that. I do have worries about some of the pieces around him. I think they've done a relatively good job of filling in some of the gaps that have formed. I think they'll have to do a little bit more in the spring, but it's one of those things where Oklahoma needed a guy that could take over games, especially with his legs, and I think they might have gotten one of the best in the entire country at doing that. Billy Edwards is the other guy I want to talk about here, the quarterback that found his way from Maryland to Wisconsin. This guy was just behind the worst offensive line in the country. I'll be totally honest. There are a lot of bad offensive lines. If you watch the Maryland game, this guy was running for his life the entire time, and he still was one of the top passers in the Big Ten throughout the year. This is a guy that I really think can explode. Now, I have worries about Wisconsin overall. There's definitely some things that I worry about. I think some of the talent level, there's going to be a gap in a lot of these games. There's no doubt about that. Now, I do think Billy Edwards is a guy that can give you a spark. He can give you certain moments throughout this season where it's probably not going to be the perfect year. You know, maybe you finish 7-5, maybe you finish 8-4, but maybe he can get you that Ohio State win. Maybe he can get you that Oregon win. Maybe he can get you that Penn State win, and then you're looking up and you're saying, it was a tough year, no doubt about that, but we got that one big moment that every single program across the board, when you have a new head coach, you need that one big moment. You need that one big game that just makes everything make sense and you put everything in order. I think he can do that for Wisconsin and then get a little energized going into 2025 will be an awesome, awesome thing to watch, and definitely a guy that I cannot think higher of, if I'm being totally honest. Barry and Brown, another guy that I just love, if I'm being honest. I worked a job where I did a lot of data input for a sports data company, Sports Info Solutions, and I was at Kentucky. I worked with Kentucky and did kind of their participation every single week. This guy's just so much fun to watch. He's one of those guys that you watch him, no disrespect, but in the Kentucky offense, it was almost painful to watch him in certain respects because you knew what he could do, you knew the ability he had, and you knew he wasn't being utilized the way that he should have. And frankly, I think LSU is going to be more than happy to utilize him the right way. And the best thing about this is he plays off Nick Anderson and Aaron Anderson incredibly, incredibly well. Both those guys are very, very different wide receivers from themselves, but very different from what Barry and Brown is. So the way that I see it, you have Garrett Nussmeier's deep ball accuracy, you have Barry and Brown's outright speed. It's going to be a terrifying duo. When they get downfield and they make that 1 or 2 big plays throughout the game, he could be a total game changer. And then you look at what he can do on kick return, on punt return. He can totally change this season for LSU. He can make this team just that much, a little bit more explosive, that little bit more terrifying, and then give that defense just that little bit more of a cushion that they're badly going to need. It's going to be awesome to watch what he can do, and definitely a guy that I cannot think higher of, if I'm being honest. Eric Rivers is another guy I want to talk about. He made his way from FIU to Georgia Tech, and this one I really like the fit of in a lot of ways. You know, what Buster Faulkner likes to do is get the ball on the outside to his playmakers pretty quickly on RPOs, on RPO moves, on screens, and then let them do what they do. And that's exactly what Eric Rivers loves to do. Very good after the catch. Definitely a guy that's very comfortable in the slot or outside. He's someone that he's Eric Singleton in a lot of respects. And now we can say, I don't want to say that I don't want to say he's market or great value, Eric Singleton, but a little bit of a step down in talent. Let's just put it that way for Eric Singleton, but he's absolutely a guy that can fit the bill of what he needs to do in that offense, and definitely can be a guy that at least makes that one sting just a little bit less. Can make a number of plays, had over 1,000 yards at FIU this past year. I think he could be a really special player for Georgia Tech in 2024, or 2025. And then you got Chase Sewell. This is the other guy I'm watching very closely, the wide receiver over at Iowa State now, coming over from East Carolina. And you lose Jaden Higgins and you lose Jalen Noel. you're going to have to find guys. And this is a very good guy to find. Over 600 yards in the past 2 seasons. He's 6'4", 195. Will give you that kind of that big play threat, that 50-50 ball type threat you very badly need. He's going to be awesome to watch. And I think when you look at that wide receiver room for Iowa State, not necessarily as star-studded as it was before, but Chase Sewell, Eli Green, Isaiah Alston, all very talented kids, and all kids that came up from the FCS or the Group of 5 level. Isaiah Alston and Eli Green have been there for a year. I think they're going to be a really fun group. I don't necessarily think they're going to be better than what Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel brought to this team, but I do think they're going to be plenty to fill the gaps of this team, and I think the run game is going to be that little bit better to open up doors for these guys. So I think everyone did a really incredible job throughout that thing. I think those guys just stood out a little bit more aggressively to me. The one that I'm watching very closely is Berrien Brown. I cannot wait to see what he can do in that LSU offense. I think we could walk out of this year with him having like 4 50-yard touchdowns, if I'm being totally honest, maybe even more than that. So really going to be awesome to watch that unfold. But let's take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about all of my transfer portal pickups on the defensive side of the ball, the ones that I like the most on that side. Definitely some bigger names on here, some names that are a little bit smaller, but definitely some big-time pickups and some guys that I cannot wait to watch in 2025, and we'll talk about them right after this, so stick with us.